Hello, 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 all you Slayer heads. Welcome back to Slay to Z, a tribute to the entire song catalog of one of the greatest bands of all time, Slayer, where every episode we aim to pick, slice, and dissect all things Slayer. Today we're spinning what is arguably Slayer's signature song, Angel of Death, from 1986's Rain and Blood. Angel of Death is a Jeff Hanneman penned song and has been a live staple ever since its release 40 years ago. As the album opener, it sets a definitive and merciless tone for the rest of the record. Full throttle, no prisoners, and no fucks given. This is without a doubt the single most discussed and analyzed song in Slayer's catalog. It's also one of, if not the most highly regarded songs ever released by the band, and indeed by the entire metal community. So let's jump in and add unnecessarily to the decades-long dialogue and see if Angel of Death is as good as basically everyone has asserted since the dawn of time. Now, I've already discussed the guitar tone featured throughout Rain and Blood on the Altar of Sacrifice episode, so I don't want to rehash too much, though I will mention just how incredible the guitars do sound in this song. Both the rhythm and lead tones are extremely well defined, which is something I'm sure both Jeff and Kerry were grateful for, because everyone could finally hear what they were playing, and thereby commanding an even higher level of respect, because it instantly became more evident how challenging the music they were writing and performing really was. Now let's talk riffs. That intro riff to the song, and especially the arrangement of the riff, is so ridiculously aggressive. The bar is immediately set sky high from the first cymbal choke and kind of chunked E chord. I'm not sure who actually tracked the guitars in the studio, probably both Kerry and Jeff at this point in their career, but that descending slide, and those stabs or chokes that were Jeff's parts during the live performances of the song, damn. I'm a sucker for the little details. And the addition of that second guitar doing that descending slide into the next series of chokes or stabs is just such a delicious small accent that I feel adds to the immediacy of the whole intro. This riff serves as the vehicle for bringing the rest of the band in one by one as well. First guitar, the second guitar slides in, drums are choking until they start doing a little bit more, kind of building, which we'll get to later. And then Tom with his vocals, and then the bass. It's a masterful build-up on the way to the verse riff, which in itself is killer. For as well regarded as the first couple of riffs are, it seems most people are in agreement that the absolute star of the show in terms of guitar is the breakdown riff. And it is a halftime banger that begins, again, with a single guitar soloing the first few bars before the second guitar and the rest of the band jump in to accompany the final part of the riff before everyone settles into this massive mid-tempo groove. This riff is so characteristically Slayer because of how weirdly atonal it is, and the way that it manages to both descend and ascend up the neck in the space of this same damn riff. It's really incredible. The bridge then moves to a different path and shifts to a riff that's based a little bit more on sliding power chords that's definitely no less heavy, even if it is slightly less groovy and definitely less weird and atonal and slayery. There's some great Slayer harmonizing going on towards the end of each turn of that riff before a massive Lombardo snare crack stops the riffing dead in its tracks, and the listener is immediately overwhelmed by Kerry and Jeff exchanging solos that are, in terms of stereotypically chaotic Slayer solo work, right on point and possibly some of the finest examples of their style. Short, frantic, shrill, up until a final natural harmonic from Hanneman, gradually dipping the pitch with the whammy bar as the note decays until everything comes to a neck-breaking stop with the drum solo. One more chorus with heightened tension thanks to Tom's vocals, kind of going into a different space, and then we're out. It's airtight, it's uncompromising, it's the shit. And so what of the bass, which we haven't spoken a whole lot of so far in any of these episodes? Well, Not a whole lot's changed. It's slightly audible, but it's more in that sense that you would definitely notice its absence if it were to be like completely dumped out of the mix, rather than listening to it as an individual instrument in the context of the mix. The bass is certainly most prominent during the slower breakdown riff, but even then, it's mostly just kind of aping the guitar, so it doesn't stand out so much as it just adds additional low end to that guitar sound. In the world of Slayer, that's about as much as one can reasonably expect, and really, it's completely fine. For Dave Lombardo, Angel of Death is truly an exercise in both dynamics and emphasis. The punches to the gut that Dave's cymbal chokes and dramatic snare flams provide kind of signal all the major riff and tempo changes at several points within the track. And how about that intro again? Dave starts with a series of cymbal chokes, followed by alternating between working the hell out of the hi-hat, kind of like the Black Magic intro, and then doing the big descending tom fill before settling into a barreling double bass pattern when Tom's big scream comes in. Guys, all of that happens in the first 20 seconds of the song. It's so much going on, and it all fits perfectly. A lot of musicians talk about playing for the song, and a lot of those musicians seem to be completely full of shit. But Lombardo is absolutely playing for the song and helping establish key motifs in the intro and later in the song as well. When the band drops out and the breakdown riff starts, Dave comes in with a halftime beat on the ride that is immensely satisfying. It just grooves so well. Arrangement-wise, it also makes a lot of sense once the vocals come back in and Dave switches over to the hi-hat for that same beat, but now with a kind of double time feel. It's so tasteful. It's awesome. This choice thickens the sound a bit to help reinforce that vocal, and it's a trick that has continued on for so many drummers of so many divergent styles for decades. Now, I'm not here to say that Dave Lombardo created this approach. That would be ridiculous. But he definitely had a major hand in promoting it more in extreme music beginning in the 1980s. Now, if we're going to talk Angel of Death drums, we got to talk about the big double bass solo that serves as the transition from the bridge and guitar solos into the outro chorus. Now, at first listen, Dave Lombardo's solo in Angel of Death bears some resemblance to the solo in At Dawn They Sleep from the previous year, which we'll be reviewing pretty soon. And while they are functionally similar in that they both serve to transition the song from bridge to outro, they are actually pretty different compositionally. The Angel of Death solo is all kick drums until the last bit, wherein Dave rains down a series of tom flams, like descending tom flams, before the band kicking back into that intro/outro riff again. In At Dawn They Sleep, Dave is working the kick drums along with the toms to produce a beat that has the rhythmic qualities of like a turbocharged locomotive. It's just got this chugga 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 kind of feel to it. So definitely not the same, although again they kind of play a similar part and purpose within the context of the whole song. So while we're on the subject of that infamous Angel of Death drum break, a little side story. So I recall back in 2001 when Slipknot's infamous second album, Iowa, was released. Now, mind you, I was a very, very slow adopter of Slipknot. In fact, it wasn't until years after the fact, probably somewhere around Volume 3 or even after, I started kind of coming around very little. I kind of had that typical old school resistance towards like the image and the fact that they had a DJ and a sampler in the band, along with the concept of any band having 9 members, at least any band that wasn't playing ska and needing a horn section, you know? Anyways, a close friend of mine was very much on the Slipknot train, and he was trying really, really hard to make a convert out of me. And I remember him playing the Heretic Anthem. This was, like I said, within a couple of weeks of the album coming out. So it was very fresh, very brand new. Anyways, he was playing the Heretic Anthem for me, and me feeling kind of mildly intrigued by it. I was like, okay, this is all right. They're approximating something pretty heavy. But then it happened. Joey Jordison, the then drummer of Slipknot, proceeded to play a drum break in the middle of the song that was so obviously clipped from Angel of Death. And I was appalled and annoyed. Just terribly, terribly, terribly irritated by the whole affair. Of course, from everything that I've read, Joey Jordison himself never shied away from acknowledging the fact that it was meant as a bit of a tribute to Dave Lombardo. Like, it was completely intentional. But at the time, my friend, he wasn't hearing any of it. And he was having the same feelings about Joey's drum break as I had had and many other people had had about Lombardo's drum break in Angel of Death. Just thinking, like, this is awesome. I will say that once my shitty elitist snobbery subsided a few years later, I came to really appreciate what Joey was doing and the fact that it was kind of like this homage to Lombardo. In fact, I now hold up Iowa, the album, as one of the most vital sounding and important metal albums of all time. And if you've been shut off from Slipknot for those same reasons that I was for so long, I encourage you to give Iowa an objective spin because it is killer. It is the most brutally heavy, popular, almost damn near mainstream record that has ever been recorded. Period. Point blank. I know things are changing now. The landscape's changing and we have, Knock Loose and stuff like that. But this was heavy in a very different way a long, long time before these bands. They kind of kicked down the door in that regard. Anyways, weren't we doing a Slayer podcast? I forget. Oh, yeah. So my favorite Dave performances are yet to come in the Slayer recording timeline, but Angel of Death is the full Lombardo and absolutely has to be in consideration for some of his finest work. Okay, well, we all knew it was coming. The controversial lyrics. Oh boy. Well, I'll tell you what, before we do that, let's talk Tom. So up to this point, Tom was no stranger to belting out that trademark falsetto scream. He had used the technique often on Show No Mercy and a little more sparingly, but still prominent throughout Hell Awaits. But damn, this first scream in Angel of Death absolutely takes the prize for the best and most powerful example of that infamous Araya falsetto. It's so singularly identifiable and iconic that it has transcended to punctuating internet memes for the better part of the last 20 years. You guys know what I'm talking about. The little video of the little bird chicks in the nest, and out of nowhere, their heads pop up and mouths wide open, ready to feed from their mother bird, and it just is accompanied by the Araya Angel of Death scream. It's hilarious, and it's so perfect. It's truly an internet win. One of the few internet wins. So anyways, the confidence for Araya seems to have made a massive difference in his performance. And I've wondered if the choice to place the scream right at the top of the track was meant to illustrate the voice of the figurative Angel of Death, or conversely, the anguished scream of one of the angel's victims portrayed in the lyrics. The choice for Tom to kind of decay that falsetto into that harsh, tortured sounding scream is a stroke of creative genius, and really it's impressive execution, if you'll pardon the really unfortunate pun. But it's really impressive how he pulled it off, because there's so much control in the way that he decays that from that really high falsetto clean thing down into the tortured anguish scream of hell. So elsewhere, Tom displays a growing edge and aggression to his vocal style that fits better with the music and image of Slayer than on the previous two records. Gone is the shouting and talk singing and the dramatic flair. There's a little bit of shouting still, but really it's taking on more of just more identity, I guess. I can only imagine the impression that this made on those mid-'80s metalheads upon first listen. it must have been akin to, like, my God, how are these guys getting even heavier and sicker every album they put out? Because the jump, as discussed before, the jump from Hell Awaits to Rain and Blood is it's seismic. It's gigantic. Okay. No more stalling. We gotta talk words. Jeff Hanneman's words, to be exact. Everyone knows that the angel of death in question is, in fact, Dr. Joseph Mengele, known for being one of the worst during the Nazis' reign of terror and fascism in the early to mid 1940s. Now, this is obviously not a history podcast, and again, the subject matter of this song has been discussed ad nauseum, so I don't want to get too lost in the weeds here. As Hanneman details in his lyrics, Mengele was responsible for truly repulsive human experimentation on prisoners in the Auschwitz concentration camp for the better part of 2 years. Hanneman was quoted on multiple occasions as saying the lyrics were inspired by a couple of books he purchased about Mengele while they were out on tour, to just kind of pass the time while traveling from gig to gig. Jeff's interest in World War II, and specifically the Third Reich, was deeply rooted in hearing and knowing of his father's experience fighting as an American against the Nazis during World War II. Angel of Death generated a lot of controversy, even prior to its release. Famously, Slayer's distributor in the 80s, Columbia Records, flat out refused to release Rain and Blood, largely because of the lyrics of the song. However, Geffen Records stepped in and was able to give the album a wide release, although it kind of came in like 6 months later than it was originally intended. What's ironic about that, though, is that David Geffen, the founder and head of Geffen Records, is himself Jewish. Anyone that actually reads the lyrics objectively should be able to interpret them as primarily being an accounting of the atrocities committed by Mengele. Yes, they are quite descriptive, but at no point and in no way is Angel of Death celebrating or glorifying Nazi practices or ideology. In fact, I would argue that referring to Mengele as quote-unquote rancid and quote-unquote infamous butcher are not exactly glowing salutations in the lyrics. So before we close this out, I just want to drop a factoid I came across that may only be of interest to me. The lyric, "A bassinate, eyes that bleed," is not only grimly descriptive, but it's also allegedly the only recorded use of the word "abassinate." Think of all the music, as far as anybody has been able to tell, all history of recorded music, and nobody's ever said or sang the word "abassinate." It's fascinating. It's simultaneously super interesting and surprising, and also not really that surprising because it is such a weird, archaic word. But what a gnarly word it is. For me, it has a tone to it that evokes like the same psychological response as like a blade being flashed ominously. It's simultaneously a coldly clinical and grimly antiquated term, entirely fitting of the subject matter and wildly original in the context of music and art. Again, so often it's the little things that lift these songs to the next level. Look, this song and later others, along with Slayer's persistent use of Nazi-influenced imagery, helped people that were out of the know develop a perception that the band were a bunch of satanic neo-Nazis, which, for people in the know, was ridiculous and missing the entire point of all of this. Slayer was about pushing buttons and making people uncomfortable. It started with over-the-top Satanism, then adopted Nazi themes, and eventually evolved into like this anti-government, anti-religion, anti-social tirade thing. Angel of Death was the band's first dramatic leap down this path. It was painted as a major risk by everyone outside of their bubble, but one also gets the impression that it was never a risk to the guys because it was the next logical step in their mission of extremity. So does Angel of Death live up to all the praise heaped upon it over the last 4 decades? Hell yes, it does. It's a masterpiece in Slayer's early catalog, and indeed in the history of heavy music. And for our purposes here, it's going straight to number 1 with a bullet. Straight to the top of the list. I think that's inarguable. There's a reason why Slayer cannot play a gig without playing Angel of Death. It helped define so much of what is identifiable and respected about this band. In that regard, it's a special track and will always and unavoidably be in the conversation about the songs in the top half of Slayer's catalog. Actually, probably at least the top quarter of Slayer's catalog. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a small run of classic Slayer tracks. And on the next episode, we are going all the way back to the debut album Show No Mercy in 1983 for another perennial crowd favorite, The Antichrist. Let's do it. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're hearing this. If you want to drop a line to the show directly to give me a pat on the back for my efforts, correct me, tell me how killer Angel of Death is as if we don't already know, or tell me why you disagree. I'm always happy to read your messages at slaytozpod@gmail.com. slaytozpod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and as always, remember.